please welcome Chris Brian Graham!
So now you know why I like coming to the show. So thank you, Marsha, very much for inviting me, and really for supporting me in choosing to come here and share this particular story tonight. I appreciate it. Even now, something like 9 years after it happened, I still feel like I see this guy everywhere, especially at this time of year, which is around when it happened. Even when I came in here tonight, there was a guy at the back in sort of a light-colored jacket, looked exactly like him. It wasn't, but I thought it was a guy. Anyway, here's the story. So in 2008, I was living in New York City, and I was working as a lawyer. I worked in one of the skyscrapers that make up the skyline of Lower Manhattan, near where the World Trade Center used to be, and where is now the Freedom Tower. And some of you will remember that in 2008, New York was at the center of a global financial crisis. What happened was that many large banks and corporations lost billions of dollars in the stock market, much more than they could afford to lose. And as a result, many thousands of people in America and around the world lost their jobs very quickly. So that's clearly very awful, but it's also very abstract. So let's try and make it a little bit particular. I want you to look around the bar, if you will, at the people you're sitting next to, look in their faces, and notice how you can see how they're feeling in their face. And now I want you to imagine that in the time that I've been talking to you, some people you have never met made some decisions that you have no control over, and as a result of that, the person you're looking at now has just lost their job. Imagine that everybody in the bar here tonight has just lost their job. What that means is that in about 6 days, when most of us have a rent or a mortgage payment due, now we can no longer afford that. It means the person you're looking at right now is going to go home tonight and eat the food in their fridge, which they can no longer afford to replace. Do you feel how the energy in the room has shifted? Do you feel how uncomfortable it is? So every day in the fall of 2008 in New York City, it felt like that. Day after day, hundreds of people would just appear on the sidewalk outside of a skyscraper, squinting in the midday sun, holding those boxes you get when you get fired. It was sad and terrible, and you could just feel the scary energy being released into the city. Including on a particular night in October of 2008, I was working late at my office on the 26th floor of a faceless skyscraper. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, I turned off my computer, walked through the deserted office, and took the elevator down to the parking garage, where I also parked my bicycle. When the doors opened in the parking garage, I immediately heard loud banging and glass breaking and shrieking and yelling and stuff hitting metal. This huge, awful noise came tumbling down the corridor into the elevator and hit me. But I couldn't see anything. In front of me was just an empty corridor of parking spaces, concrete pillars, fluorescent lights, a few shadows. Whatever was happening sort of around the bend, and all the sound, this crazy noise, was echoing off all the flat surfaces. So I had no idea what was going on, how many people were involved, what was happening. And for a moment, I thought I should just stay in the elevator, right? Nobody's going to know. And in fact, the doors of the elevator started to close before I ran into the corridor, running, thinking somebody might be in trouble, and maybe if I just appear, like the sight of me will be enough to scare off the assailants, like a witness. Which in retrospect was insane, because I was a 25-year-old corporate lawyer at the time, which is like the human equivalent of a mechanical pencil. And completely unscary to people whose lives involve actual fighting. Nevertheless, I barreled down the corridor and I could hear the noise getting louder and louder, and then as I rounded the corner, it just stopped. And I skidded a bit in my dress shoes on the concrete. And I could see about 20 yards away, so like from me to the bar, there was a car, and on the other side of the car, there was a man. And the man was breathing heavily and sort of heaving and disheveled, and he was looking down at the ground on the other side of the car. So I yelled at him, "Hey," and I ran towards him, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just kept looking down at the ground, and then he disappeared on the other side of the car. When I came around the car, the first thing I could see was a dog just sitting there. Next to the dog was the man, and he was sitting with his back against the wall. The car was nose first in the space. The driver's window was smashed. The door was dented. His hand was all bloody. He had blood on his shirt. His jacket and trousers were disheveled and dirty. He was crying. And the dog was just sitting there looking at him. Must have brought his dog to work that day or something. And the dog was fine. But I realized that what I thought was sort of shrieking back on the elevator must have been his dog yelping or barking as he attacked or destroyed his car. And so I stood there and I looked at this man, and he was still crying and he hadn't looked at me, and this is all happening in a few seconds. And I noticed now beside the man is one of those boxes that you get when you get fired. He's even had like a framed photograph of his family in the box. That glass was broken too. And I keep staring at the man, and I'm catching my breath now, and I'm just sort of looking around. I don't really know what to do, and then that's when I look up and I see the ceiling. You know how parking garages have low ceilings, and they often have like water pipes below the ceiling? Yeah, so the guy had tied his belt around the water pipe. I'd never seen anything like that before. And also the belt was sort of at this sort of strange angle. It looked like it had sort of like ripped or torn where one of the holes was, presumably from his weight. So I felt a lot of things in this moment. The first thing I felt was anger. Because I'm noticing like more details about the scene as I'm standing there, and I notice now that the car that he's been destroying is a Mercedes. And I notice that his suit and his shoes are expensive. And he's got a chunky watch on his wrist. It looks like a Rolex. And it occurs to me that the only people who work this late in this building, driving this car, in those clothes, are rich lawyers and bankers. This guy's probably a fucking millionaire. And this is how he deals with losing his job. You have a family, man. What the fuck is the matter with you? So of course, the tide of anger washes out, and a flood of pity rolls in, because I don't know this man, right? He's clearly lost his job, and he feels emasculated, probably, and humiliated. He doesn't want to face his family. I haven't lost my job. I don't know what it's like. I shouldn't judge this guy. And I guess the worst thing is, he's here in the parking garage trying to take some semblance of control over his future, misguided, but still. And he failed also at that, right? His fucking belt broke. Which is why, in that moment only, it seemed to me like the compassionate thing to do was to take off my belt and put it on the ground and walk quietly away. So I did that.